All right, let me just do a quick breakdown of this render right here that I just finished today. So there's three things I want to cover. One is the face thing here with all these stones creating this outline of a face. The second thing is all the plants and vines and trees and stuff. And then the third thing is the lighting and camera angle kind of tying everything together and just the whole atmosphere overall. So let's just start off with this and then we'll get to the other 2 points in a second. I'll just show you how to set this up because it's a lot easier than it looks. So what this is just a basic geometry nodes setup. If I just show you the nodes here, here's what it is, but I'll just explain it and show what's happening more clearly in a second. But it's a standard like particle system kind of setup thing that, you know, it's distribute points, instance some sort of thing on the points, and in this case, we're just instancing some stretched out cubes. So if I was going to set that up from scratch, it looks like this. If I just bring something over here, I'll show you what it's scattered on in a second and where to get the face and stuff like that. But if we just do a quick demonstration of what's happening over here, you need two things. One is a surface to scatter on like this. And the second thing is some sort of thing that's going to be the scattered stuff. So I used a collection of things, which was just basically this with a couple of variations of it. I've also done versions of that where it's like a hexagonal thing like this. And you can do those more like Icelandic looking basalt rock things. And you can do that if you want. In this case, I just went with cubes. Okay, so what I did in mind was just go in and do some bevels. I just threw a bevel modifier on the entire thing, really light. And then I also just did some other random bevels, like, you know, you grab one edge at a time, Control B, do a little thing like that. If, you know, do a little thing like that. You can go on the corner too. If you want to bevel a single vertex, Control B won't do anything, but you can go Control Shift B. Control Shift B will give you a single vertex bevel. So you just kind of go through, you're going to make some n-gons, doesn't really matter. Go through and just make some very slight kind of chips on it. You can even do that in the middle if you want to go that way. I recommend adding loop cuts before you add too many n-gons, because you can see I can't even add loop cuts now. But point is, you can either sculpt it or just bevel it or just get some little chips on it however you want. The main thing is don't have it perfectly straight. If you have it like no bevels, nothing, it's going to look a little too perfect. And that kind of ruins the effect. So you want some imperfections, and that's the point of this here. Okay, so once you have a couple of variations of that and you have different sized bevels or different heights or different whatever, just to mix it up, you can add all these things to a collection. I'll just call it pillars test. And then we have that over here in a new collection. So it's just, I should probably turn on screencast keys so you can see what I'm pressing. Select these, M, moves it to a collection. And it's in there. Okay, so let's look at the geometry node setup. It's very simple. So the way this works is we have these here. I'm going to make sure I apply the scale. And then on this thing over here, the thing that's going to be the thing that scatters all these other things, we can just go into the geometry nodes editor right here. So if you're on any other window, top left, find that icon, switch to geometry nodes editor, hit new, and here's the nodes we're going to use. Distribute points on faces. Okay, that's going to just distribute a bunch of points on this thing, and it's going to make it disappear, which we actually don't need the thing underneath it, so that's fine. We're going to do an instance on points right there. And then for our instance, I'm going to either use an object info if you have one single object, or if you've done what I've done and you moved them all to a collection, we can take a collection info. So that's going to go there. Choose the collection we just made. I called mine pillars test. There it is. And I'm going to plug that into the instance input on this instance on points. Okay, so there's three things we have to check. Separate children, reset children, and pick instance, which will, I think, just pick a random one of them instead of doing all of them at once. So if you do that, it will now work. The thing is, the density is way too high. So we'll just lower that down until it looks a bit more reasonable. Okay, so what I did on mine was just a random value going into the scale. I didn't set it all the way to 0. I set it to maybe like 0.8 or 0.7, somewhere around there. And that's going to give you a little bit more variation too. You can do a random rotation if you want, and then snap it to 90-degree increments if you want to do that. For this case, I don't think you really need to, but anyways, that's what that is. The interesting thing here is whatever surface you put this on. So say I do something like this, we'll just subdivide a little thing, and say I do some just edits to this where we have like, say we have some weird surface that's like really uneven. If we put that same modifier on it, I can actually just select this 1 second, hit Control L, and then copy modifiers. I have to just apply the scale. You can see that it's going to take on the shape of whatever's underneath it, right? So it's kind of following whatever shape this has underneath it. So if I start moving this around, you can see that that's kind of what that's doing. So if you put that onto a face model, which I just got this free face from CG Trader like literally years ago. So I just have had this in my asset library for a long time. It's literally just some random free face model from the CG Trader website. So you can just drop in anything you want, a hand, a face, whatever else you want to mess around with. You know, put that in here, apply scale. I'm going to hit OK because I already have one in here. That won't happen for yours. And then we could just hit Control L, copy modifiers, and now it's going to do that. So the thing is, they're rotated all weird. That's only going to happen if you haven't applied the rotation. So it thinks it's like this. So if we just hit Control A, apply rotation, now they're all facing the right way. And if you want to rotate this, you can just go into edit mode and then rotate that in edit mode, and you can see that now they're all going to stay upright. Okay, so that's what I did on mine, and that's the effect right there. For the texture, I think I just put a Quixel texture on it. Let's see, I don't even know what material I have on here. So there's some other stuff going on with this. It's a stone texture. That's really what it is. There's kind of like some things that aren't even being used. Like this is just nothing. So we have our base color and ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion doesn't really matter in this case. So it's just base color, roughness, normal. Displacement's not on, so ignore that. So just base color, roughness, normal. Some things are happening to the color, like I'm lowering the saturation. It's a bit too saturated, so we're just dropping that a bit and shifting the hue slightly. I have this more like advanced edgeware node thing on it, but look at what that's doing. Like not that much. It's highlighting the edges a little bit. If you're curious what this is exactly, I can show you the shading setup. I have done videos on this. This is a little bit more advanced than those other ones because we're using a second ambient occlusion to remove the edgeware in places that wouldn't make as much sense. So you don't have to worry about this. If you do though, it's just the main thing here is ambient occlusion. That goes into this color ramp, which is going from 1 to a high value. So the lowest value is 1, which is pure white. The highest value is actually above white at, in this case, 15, quite high. And that's going to highlight the edges with the inverted ambient occlusion from 1, which will keep the color the same, all the way up to a higher value. So it'll only brighten the edges is basically what you're doing. Okay, not important right now. It's barely doing anything. And you don't need to worry about that if that's confusing and you don't want to do this. So it's completely not that important and very optional. Okay, so that is in there. The last thing we're doing to the base color is a curve node. It's just dropping the brightness slightly. So you can see there, before, after, not a huge difference. I just felt like it looked better, a little bit darker, so that's what I did. The other thing that's happening is I'm just using a moss texture. This is just another texture inside of a group, just a regular moss texture. It's being mixed. Those two shaders of the stone and the moss are being mixed together with a noise texture here. You can see where that noise pattern is like this. So moss is showing up in those areas, just where that noise is bringing it in. Again, it's very optional to do something like that. This is just the setup I have, and you can customize this however you want. There's nothing special about this setup. The main thing I'd recommend is just pick a fitting texture in the first place. So use something that's high quality and kind of fits the rest of the environment. So in this case, I picked a stone texture because that's what I wanted, and the rest is all extra. So to be honest, most textures that you can download from the internet look really good just straight out of the box, and you don't need to do that much to them to get them to look really well. The main thing that's going to make it fit better or worse is the brightness value, and that's actually the main thing, the brightness and color. So the way I adjust, like the first adjustment that I'll do on my textures is usually some kind of brightness and color adjustment. So the easiest way to use that is just a hue saturation value node. It lets you shift the hue, so I can make it more like this color if I want. You can see it's a little hard to tell because it's really desaturated, but pay attention to the underneath stone here. We can shift the hue, make it more cool, make it more warm. If I just saturate it more, you can see what that's doing with that. We can adjust the overall saturation. So if it's too saturated and colorful, we can drop that down. So mine was at 0.34, quite low saturation. And then this also lets you control the value, which is doing the same thing that this curve node is doing. That's the brightness up and down. So if it's too bright, drop it a little. If it's too dark, bump it up a little. And if you just mess with those 3 values, you can get the color to match the rest of the scene quite easily. Okay, and that's the main texture. That's on all the stuff that I brought in that wasn't like a rock model. That's on all of it. So all the pillars have that, and that's pretty much all the modeling I did, quote unquote modeling, just cubes. Let's talk about the plants now. So I've been using this add-on called Arborea. It's Sweeper 3D's add-on. It just came out a few weeks ago. So this is now all I use for nature scenes. So it's this add-on has the best quality trees that I found in terms of it is pretty much the perfect balance of quality and still running fast and good optimization. So that's why I like this one. Is there's a whole bunch of powerful scattering tools in here. I'm not really going to go over that. I've done a video on Arborea if you want to watch that, but I'm just hand placing everything in here. So what this is, if you don't know, it's basically an asset library of a whole bunch of trees and plants, and then it's combined with a scatter system that lets you distribute it in a whole bunch of powerful ways, but it's like quite intuitive and easy to use as well. So I was in this one just using the spawn asset, importing assets manually. So you can just go in here, we can just find some tree that I like, import, it imports it. It's in the scene wherever my cursor was. There it is. It's way over here in my demonstration area. So we can bring in that tree and it's in. So that's how easy it is to use this add-on, and that's all I'm doing here. It just, yeah, it's and they look fantastic up close. There is yeah. I'm not going to keep going on about Arborea, but you get the point. It's really good, and there's a link below if you want to get it. Okay, so all the plants here, including all these little shrubs, like little various little things like this, all the trees, and also all the ivy and stuff growing on the sides here, that's all from Arborea. Okay, so the way I've done the ivy is I'm just using mostly chunks of models of the ivy that Arborea comes with. So in here there's a whole ivy category of just patches of ivy you can import. So if I just choose one of these, import that, I'll just put it over here. It just gives you a whole chunk like this that you can kind of slam onto a surface. On mine, I did end up using a simple deform modifier, and what that's doing is it's just curving it slightly. You can see we're just bending it around a little bit like that. And that way I could just kind of get it to fit this face curvature a little bit better. And then I'm also combining that with some other like little, this is just some random little like shrub thing. There's a few of those that are just like also in here to kind of fill in any gaps and just make it feel a bit more natural too. And then that's on here. I've deleted some parts of the face. If I just isolate this, where you can see some of it's using a mask, but it's essentially just deleted. So that's the before. And then just deleting certain parts I didn't like, it just goes to that right there. So I thought it was kind of cool to have it like hollow on top and have trees growing out of that section. So that's what that is. Man, that looks just so cool. Even looking at it in the viewport, it just looks really interesting. Okay, and then all the trees are just kind of placed in a way where I didn't want to interrupt the lighting, which I'll get to in a second. So I wanted a clear path from where this lighting is, which is a mess. It's actually less complicated than it looks, so we'll get to that in a second. But clear opening for that to come in, and I'm trying not to block that with the trees, but I'm still trying to keep it like trees in spots where it's not feeling too open. So it was a weird balance to kind of strike where I'm putting trees in front of the camera in certain places, even places that don't make sense. Like you probably noticed this one just floating 10 feet off the ground off to the side. You can't see that part in the render. You can only see the leaves coming off of that. So I'm doing stuff like that where there's stuff outside the frame that's only placed there where you can see a little corner of it, and it's helping to frame the shot. It's adding some interesting colors, and it's just placed in a way where it kind of is meant to outline things and draw your attention more towards the middle stuff and just make it feel more dense and full overall. And it doesn't need to be, placed in a realistic location. It just needs to look and feel right in the render. And that's a good example of that right there. Obviously the stuff that you can see needs to be like connected to the ground and placed in a way that makes sense. But the stuff that is just like a corner of the leaf that you see in the edge of the frame, it doesn't matter if it's connected or not, as long as as long as it doesn't show in the render, it's fine. So yeah, there is some interesting framing going on here. Again, it's just stuff on the outside edge of the frame with leaves close to the camera. It's kind of like a natural vignette that you're creating. a kind of darkening around the edge. And what that does is it just helps draw your attention subconsciously towards the center of the frame. It also adds a nice level of detail without being overwhelming. So I love doing that in nature renders, just having leaves and foliage on the very outside edges of the frame. It just looks really nice when you have that, and there's something interesting to look at in the middle. Okay, let's get to the lighting, because that's kind of the most important thing that's making this look good overall, aside from the actual models. So okay, let's kind of just break this down here. If we go to the shader editor, let's leave that there. Let's go to the shader editor here and then go to the world shader editor. There is some subtle background light, but it's very minimal. So if I hide this, you can't even see it. Okay, it's so dark that this is what it looks like. It's basically off. Okay, so there's basically no background light. It's a tiny bit from this HDRI, which is turned way down. All the main lighting is from two main sources. So one of them is this main spotlight over here. I believe it's this one. One of these ones is the main one, believe it or not. So there's that main spotlight right there, which is highlighting the face. There's kind of like two main ones, which are acting as kind of the same thing. So without those, you can see now it's all just kind of these supporting lights around here. So it looks really messy, but I'm still following the same lighting principle that I always talk about, which is one, maybe two main lights that are doing 80% of the heavy lifting. If I just kind of add this all to a collection and hide everything else and just have those ones showing, I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so all the lights are in a collection now, and if I just hide everything except that main light or two, I'm just going to find the other one. Okay, so yeah, you can see that's the main light right there. I'm going to hide this one too. Everything else is kind of just based around this light here, and it's supporting what this is doing. So it's two, but they're close enough together. It's kind of, I'm counting it as one, but they're basically the same brightness from the same source area, just slightly spaced apart. So there's that, and then everything's kind of like based around that. So if we look at this one light and just kind of analyze what's going on here, it's relatively large. So it's a meter in diameter, which is giving us some fairly soft shadows. So if I just set that to 0, which is the default size, look how hard and like fake looking the shadows get. When I bring that back to its original light size, it just softens out. Come on, there we go. It softens out all those shadows, so it looks a lot more realistic and just nice and a bit less harsh to look at overall. It's still fairly hard because the light's pretty far back, but anytime you're adding a spotlight, you probably do want to soften it out by increasing the radius. That's not the spot size, that's the actual radius of the light bulb itself. You probably want to increase that so that it's not like super hard shadows. Okay, and then everything else, if I start bringing these in, I'll get to the area lights in a second, but let's just look at the spotlights. Everything is just actually a duplicate of that light turned down and with the spot size way lower down. So if you look at the radius or the cone of this one, and then look at the cone of these ones, these are just tiny like little lasers that are just like shooting tiny bits of light into very specific parts of the image that it's kind of giving it like this really exaggerated forest sunlight effect. So this is not a realistic lighting setup at all, but it's kind of like a dramatized, forest sunlight setup where we're getting very harsh patches of light and shadow that are pretty forcefully separated from each other. And I'm just doing that manually by adding in these different really narrow spotlights across the scene in areas that I thought were cool. So it started with one, and then it's literally just a duplicate, lower down the spot size to a really low amount, and then go to the camera view and just kind of move that around. I'm not rotating it, I'm just moving it because I want these all coming from the same direction. That's important because we're trying to simulate sunlight is what we're faking here. So you're keeping it all from the same direction because they're all supposed to be rays from the same light source, and then just moving them around until you find an area where it's like a little patch of light looks cool, and then you can just keep doing that as many times as you want. The key here is you want to have one main light that's doing, again, 80% or so of the work, and then the rest of the stuff is kind of just supporting what that main thing is doing. If you don't have that, it's very easy for it to get overwhelming and just too complicated and too hard to manage, and too many lights are lighting up too many different things, and it just becomes a complete mess, not just in the viewport but in the render itself. So I recommend being very careful if you're going to use this setup, and if you're more of a beginner, I actually recommend kind of staying away from this sort of setup and try doing it with less lights if you can. That'll probably be a better use of your time, and it'll be easier to manage too. But yeah, you can do it this way if you want, as I'm showing here. Okay, let's talk about the other two lights which are important here, which are the kind of fill lights that are filling in just empty space up here. Those are area lights. So if I just bring that in here, let's look at that. It's just a big, bright, soft, square area light right over the top of the scene. There's actually two of them, which are doing the same thing, just in different spots. So if you look at that there, if I just hide these two, look at how much brighter all the ambient light in all these really dark areas gets. If I just turn those on, it's all of a sudden looking a little bit more like daytime, a little bit more, I don't want to say realistic, but less faked. If I just turn those off and on, you can see it just kind of fills in the gaps where the spotlights are not hitting. And the key here is to keep these pretty subtle. This is actually quite a bit brighter than I usually would go with these kind of fill area lights. In this case, this is kind of a weird scene, so it just worked out that way. But usually in a dark render, I'm not lighting it up that much with like ambient blue light. You can see the color here, it's just a little slightly blue. 1000 watts, two of them, large size over everything. If I hide everything else and you want to see just exactly how bright those are in terms of everything else, that's what it is. Which actually reminds me, this glow down here, that is, we're faking some bounce lighting down here. So if we look at this, I have to bring back these other spotlights so you can actually see. But basically in areas where there's like natural sunlight, in this case not actual sunlight, but fake sunlight hitting the ground, so like really bright spots like down here, this I want to accentuate the light that's reflecting off of that onto the surfaces nearby. So we can do that with just adding a soft area light. This is really not that bright. 26 watts it's plenty bright enough in the render, but it's a low number, and that's enough to, it's probably more than it needs to be, but it's enough to kind of give some fake bounce lighting. So if you're going to add this, you have to do it in areas where there is already like a lot of light bouncing off, like in this ground patch here. It would make sense that there's light bouncing off that onto the nearby surfaces, and we can kind of just, again, accentuate that and make it a bit exaggerated by adding lights in those areas that are pointing in the same direction. Okay, what I meant to show before, which was if I turn off all other lights and we just look at those fill lights, those blue area lights, that's about how bright it is there. So if we hide those, it should be complete darkness pretty much, except for a tiny bit of the HDRI, which is doing basically nothing. We bring in those two area lights, and that's kind of the level of ambient light coming from these guys up here. So it's enough to just fill in the really dark shadows, but not overwhelm the other lighting and just ruin it by washing out the scene with too much light. Okay, so that, and then plus the spotlights, gives us our final look here. And then plus those other two lights that I just turned off, which I cannot find now. These two area lights right here for the fill lights, which are probably too bright looking back on this, but whatever. Okay, another thing that's very important to the lighting here is the volumetrics. So if you watch my channel, I'm sure you've seen this before. I'm gonna keep it brief. There's a cube, which is displayed as bounds currently. So cube, just like this, regular cube mesh over the entire scene. We've put a volume scatter shader on that cube. Here's the settings. Density is pretty low. Anisotropy is pretty high. And then what I've done to get it out of the way, just so you can actually still work on this, is go into this object properties over here, go down to viewport display, and then display as bounds. That'll get it out of the way, but it's still in there and it's still having an effect. So here's what it looks like without the volume. Pretty big difference from that to all of a sudden having all this nice lush atmosphere. It makes a huge difference. So if you're not using volume, highly recommend that. Even just a little bit goes a long way, as long as you don't crank it too high. So look how low mine is, 0.009 is what I'm sticking with for this one. All right, there's this plane in the back. It's not doing anything. That's it for the lighting, actually. I will just show you the camera angle before I go. So just to give you an idea of how low this is to the ground, here is a cube, just a default cube. So that's a 2-meter tall thing. And the camera is this low down, right? So it's a fairly low camera angle, which kind of helps everything else around it feel bigger. When you place the camera lower, pointing more upwards, it often has that effect of just making everything around you or whatever you're looking at, pointing it at, making that feel a bit bigger, taller, more overwhelming, more impressive to look at. So I love these low camera angles. It is definitely my favorite angle to use. And then we're also just using a bit of a wide angle lens. So if you don't know, the default focal length, aka zoom level in Blender, is 50 millimeters, which is this. So yes, you could do that and then move the camera way back. That's an option. You can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. I like more often just doing wide angle shots. So I'm just zooming it out to 22 millimeters. So you can see that's 50, that's 22. I'll just manually type that in again. So it's like the focal length of if you were to take out your cell phone and take a picture, it's around that amount. Not that I'm trying to emulate a cell phone, but just to give you an idea of how zoomed out that is. So I like 20 to 30 millimeters for most of my renders. It's not too wide, but it's not too zoomed in. It's just a good balance for me. I do occasionally do like really wide angles. I do like telephoto renders sometimes. So it just depends on the scene. In this case, it's just an easy focal length to work with for a forest render like this, which is like a small to medium sized scene. Just a 22 millimeters. It just works really well. It's easy to use and it looks good. Okay, that's it for this breakdown. Hopefully there's some stuff in there that you learned and you found helpful. Again, if you want to use this library of plants that I'm using here, I'll leave a link below to Arborea, which is the add-on that I used all of the nature stuff in this one for. So it's absolutely my favorite nature add-on by far. So that's why I'm now affiliated with it. So I will leave a link below to that if you want to get that. That's it for this one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in some other video. Bye.